In those couple minutes, I swear my heartbeat rose and I was like at the edge of my seat. Okay, so I've been enjoying thrillers for quite a while now, and it amazes me, the stories, the kind of concepts they can have in the genre. Actually, in the last video, we talked about this movie called It Follows, and in this video, we are going to talk about this movie called The Watcher. Now, I recently watched this movie that has the same actress as the protagonist. Now, this movie is an interesting one. So, the plot of the movie is that a couple moves into another country. It's a foreign country, and the wife, the protagonist, she doesn't really speak the language, but somehow they try and they manage. But right after they move into their new place, the wife starts noticing something really weird. She starts noticing someone looking through their window like 24/7 all the time. It is kind of weird and uncomfortable, but I mean, if something like that happened to you for a moment or something, you'd just draw your curtains and do away with it. But imagine that happening 24/7, like someone looking over their window, watching you all the time. Now, that is kind of intrusive and uncomfortable. Now, one thing about this story that amazes me is that something like this could happen to anyone. Like, people watch over their window all the time, and it doesn't really make anyone uncomfortable. But imagine something like that happening 24/7. Now that can make you uncomfortable. That is really intrusive. I mean, you just draw your curtains and do away with it for some time. But if something like that would happen like all the time, that would be really uncomfortable. Now, this constant observer is not just a common neighbor. It's more of a concern right now, because the beauty of it is that you don't exactly know what's happening. You don't really understand if this woman is just being paranoid or there is something seriously wrong here. I mean, the storytelling makes you believe that it could very well be an overwhelming brain just being hyperactive. I mean, it can happen. She is alone and she doesn't even know the language in the country. She doesn't know anyone. So it can happen. But at the same time, you see reasons why it's not something that you can just ignore. Almost halfway into the movie and you're somewhat sure of what's happening here. You have an idea. But then how do you explain all this in reasonable words? Because you don't really have anything to show except your own instincts. Now, the movie has a few terrifying moments that are enough to give you chills, because these are things that can happen to anyone and just the thought of it is scary. There are moments of anticipation, there are moments of horror, and the sheer inability to convince people of all of it, it's actually really troubling, but at the same time a really good watch. Now, we have seen enough movies and TV shows to know that sometimes our mind plays tricks with us and it makes us believe things to be true that are not exactly true. Sometimes your instincts goes against everything reasonable and even you start doubting yourself. Now, this movie is something of that sort. So I have to say it is an amazing movie and it has pretty good moments to make you believe that too. A simple but still a thrilling watch. So if you are a fan of horror or do enjoy watching horror, then please go ahead and give this one a watch, because this is an absolute must watch for those who enjoy watching horror. And even otherwise, even if you don't really like horror, please watch this one, because this is not the usual horror movies that we watch. It is something different. It has a different concept. Well, there are things in this movie that are very subtle but certainly can't be ignored. And why I'm telling everyone to watch this? Well, it has a reason, and you'll get to know that reason once you watch the spoilers, the next part of this video. So that's what we are going to talk about right now, the spoilers. So if you haven't watched this movie yet, then please click off this video right now, because like I said, we are going to talk about the spoilers. From the beginning, even the screenplay is from the watcher's point of view, because you see the protagonist, the wife, she is wandering around the city and she's sitting in a place. You see her from a distance, like someone watching her, and that viewpoint kind of gave me that feel that someone is watching her. Now, in the movie, there is a point when she starts following this man because she of course doubts him, and while watching this, I'm thinking to myself, like, he's the one started out being the watcher, but the protagonist will end up being the watcher herself. And that thought was really funny, because that's not what the story is about, but still that's something, just a simple thought that crossed my mind. Now, just like any other person watching this movie, I too considered the woman to be paranoid, because I thought of course she could be paranoid, but then there is killings happening in the neighborhood, like women dying, and the police, even though the police have claimed that they have caught the killer, the serial killer, I think it is the watcher, it is that person who is killing these women, and the police has no idea. Now, till about an hour into the movie, you don't really see this person, but right after an hour, you see this person face to face, and when he shakes hands with the protagonist, you know exactly what's happening. You know that he's not exactly what he seems to be, and the protagonist is absolutely right to doubt him. Now, there are a few terrifying moments in the movie, and particularly the one in the theater. I'm kind of sure that when this movie hit the theaters, it made everyone look behind their back, because when the protagonist looked behind her back, like she wants to, but she doesn't really do it because she's so terrified. It's really terrifying. It kind of builds this tension. Now, there is another one, the train scene, where the protagonist and this watcher, they talk to each other, and you see him carrying this bag with him. You kind of see what's in the bag. You don't really know exactly what's happening, but as the protagonist is trying to figure what's inside that bag, you are trying to do the same, and the closer you get to it, you kind of have an idea, you almost figure it out, and the more certain you get, the more terrifying it becomes, because she's alone with this person and he can do just about anything he wants with her and nobody would even know. So that was really terrifying. Also, the supermarket sequence is pretty good, because you see this watcher exactly as the protagonist sees him, because you see almost half his face, or sometimes he's not in focus, sometimes it's a blur. So basically you see him exactly the way the protagonist sees him. Now, also the waving scene, it's really troubling. I mean, the protagonist waves at him to know if he's exactly looking at her, and after some time, like, he takes his sweet little time to raise his hand and he waves back. In those couple minutes, I swear my heartbeat rose and I was like at the edge of my seat. I don't really know how they do this, like they know how to build the tension really well. Now, the husband in this movie isn't really wrong either, because things like these happen every day, and even though you watch them on the news, you don't really imagine happening them with you, like personally. So he's not wrong either. Now, the most important thing about this movie that I think I noticed is that the protagonist that we watch from the beginning is not really the one that the watcher was watching. The watcher was watching the lady who was living right beside the protagonist's flat. I mean, she was a perfect target, because the watcher used to know her from work and she was living alone, so a perfectly easy target. So even though the watcher was watching this lady, the protagonist noticed him watching over his window and she thought he was watching her. So basically the protagonist caught his attention. It actually spiked his interest. So the watcher started following her. Now, till the last second, in the last couple minutes, you don't really know exactly what's going to happen. You're like, is he just going to leave, like just like that? And then the ending happens, and I guess it was a perfect ending. Now, one thing is that this movie, it's kind of one of its kind, because I have not seen anything like this before. By the way, that was the thundering right now and it's raining outside. Anyway, I haven't seen anything like this before, because this is the first time where I see something being explained from the perspective of a person that is not really the target. She wasn't originally the target. That's what I think. But do let me know what you think about it, guys, because that's what I think. Anyway, do you remember that train scene? I mean, when the watcher is carrying this bag, I think it has this lady's head in it, and that scene is done really well. It's all left up to the audience to figure, and even the protagonist is trying to figure the same thing, like, what does this bag actually carry? So she's trying to figure the same thing, and the closer you get to the bag, the more certain you become. Like, you kind of see this shadowy figure of a head, and that's really terrifying, because she's alone in this carriage and he can do anything he wants to her and nobody would even know. So that was really terrifying. In fact, you know what, after watching this movie, one thing I told myself is that no matter how abnormal, no matter how weird and uninteresting, if your gut tells you something, then it is probably true. By the way, the power just went out and that was again thundering. So anyway, that's it for today, guys. I hope you like this video, and if you do, then do give it a like and consider subscribing to my channel. And if you can, if you have the time, then definitely go ahead and give this movie a watch, because like I said, this is gonna shift perspective. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.